When you first look at the Douglas SBD Dauntless, it doesn't seem like the kind of airplane that would change the course of a war. It's not sleek, it's not fast, and it definitely doesn't look intimidating. But the truth is, this rugged, almost old-fashioned dive bomber did something no one expected. It stopped the Japanese advance in the Pacific and turned the tide of World War II. This is the story they never told you, the real truth behind the Douglas SBD Dauntless. Let's start with what made it unique. The Dauntless wasn't built for speed or glamour, it was built for precision. Its signature feature, those strange perforated metal panels on the wings, were called dive brakes. When pilots dove almost vertically toward their targets, those holes slowed the descent just enough to keep control, allowing deadly accuracy at angles that would tear other aircraft apart. Those dive brakes, combined with rock-solid handling and simple construction, turned an unremarkable airframe into one of the most effective naval weapons ever built. Now here's something most people don't realize. The Dauntless didn't have folding wings, a serious limitation for carrier storage. But that was deliberate. Folding wings meant more weight, more complexity, and less strength. Douglas engineers decided to keep the wings fixed for one reason: survivability. That rigid structure gave the SBD the toughness it needed to withstand repeated dives, high G-forces, and combat damage. While other planes twisted, cracked, or came apart in steep dives, the Dauntless held together and brought its pilots home. And then came Midway, the day this slow old bomber rewrote history. On June 4, 1942, squadrons of SBD Dauntless bombers found the Japanese fleet at its most vulnerable moment. Decks full of refueling aircraft, anti-air defenses confused, skies barely protected. In just a few minutes, Dauntless crews dropped their bombs with surgical precision, igniting the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, 4 of Japan's frontline carriers. It was the single most decisive strike in the entire Pacific War. The weapon that made it possible wasn't a cutting-edge fighter, it was the Dauntless, flown by pilots trained to hit exactly where it mattered most. But here's where the story gets deeper. The Dauntless wasn't just a miracle of design, it was a triumph of logistics and training. The US Navy didn't win Midway because the SBD was faster or stronger. They won because crews knew the aircraft inside and out. Pilots practiced dive angles, bombing runs, and coordination until every move was muscle memory. Ground crews learned how to patch damage, replace panels, and turn a shot-up bomber into a mission-ready machine in hours. This was a warplane that could be fixed on deck, refueled, rearmed, and sent back into combat before the enemy regrouped. In the chaos of naval warfare, that kind of reliability was worth more than speed. Of course, the Dauntless had weaknesses. It was slow compared to enemy fighters, lightly armored, and vulnerable if caught without escort. But the Navy adapted. They never fought on the enemy's terms. SBD squadrons worked with Wildcats and later Hellcats for protection, diving from altitude while escort fighters drew off Zeros. The result was a coordinated system, a combination of tactics, training, and teamwork that made even an outdated design devastatingly effective. There's another truth almost never mentioned. The Dauntless outlived its replacement. Its intended successor, the Curtiss SB2C Helldiver, was faster on paper but plagued with problems. Early Helldivers were unstable, maintenance-heavy, and far less reliable in combat. So the Dauntless stayed, flying from carriers long after it was supposed to retire, continuing to deliver results when newer planes failed to meet expectations. That says everything about the design philosophy behind it. Rugged simplicity beats theoretical perfection in real war. Think about this. The Dauntless wasn't a marvel of advanced engineering. It was a product of smart priorities. Instead of chasing maximum performance, Douglas engineers built something that worked under pressure. They focused on what mattered: stability, accuracy, repairability, and reliability. The SBD didn't need to impress anyone. It just needed to hit what it aimed at and come home. Here's a detail that adds real value to understanding how it killed ships. The Dauntless carried large, purpose-chosen bombs and used release systems and bombing sights calibrated for deck and hull strikes. Crews weren't dropping random explosives, they were aiming to breach flight decks, start fires, and cause flooding that ships couldn't control. A single, precisely placed hit could cripple a carrier's aviation capability for hours or sink it outright. That tactical precision multiplied by coordinated attacks is what turned individual SBD sorties into strategic victories. Don't underestimate the human element inside the SBD. Every plane carried a two-man crew, a pilot, and a rear gunner/radio operator, and their coordination mattered. The gunner wasn't just defensive, he was the aircraft's sensor, scanner, and lifesaver, covering the rear while the pilot focused on his dive. Communication between pilot and gunner, between squadron and carrier, and between pilots in the attack wave was choreographed to the second. That discipline under fire turned a vulnerable airframe into a cohesive combat system. Finally, the Dauntless left a legacy beyond Midway. It taught navies that precision attack, repairability, and integrated tactics could outweigh raw speed. It showed that a design optimized for mission success and sustainment could outperform flashier aircraft when the stakes were highest. Museums and restorations still preserve SBDS today because they embody lessons engineers and commanders still study: mission fit, survivability under stress, and the power of training and logistics. Let's end with a few hard truths about the Dauntless that reveal why it mattered so much. First, those perforated dive brakes weren't decoration. They were the key to deadly accuracy. Second, its fixed wings made it stronger and tougher, a life-saving decision in combat. Third, at Midway, it destroyed more enemy carriers than any other aircraft in the entire war. Fourth, it proved that simple, reliable engineering could outperform more advanced but fragile designs. And fifth, it stayed in service because it earned the trust of the men who flew and maintained it. The Douglas SBD Dauntless didn't win battles with glamour or raw speed. It won with precision, resilience, and teamwork. It showed that wars aren't decided by the flashiest machine, but by the one that always does its job. The Dauntless was exactly that. The plane that nobody expected to matter, but ended up changing the Pacific forever. That's the truth they never told you about the Douglas SBD Dauntless. The aircraft that proved reliability, training, and courage can outfight anything else in the sky.